we have all this attribute in our attribute table, but how do we know how it looks or if it's right? Well, one thing we can do is we can take some statistical looks at it to see if it looks the way that we would expect it to. So in this example here, what we're seeing is the magnitude of various earthquakes that have occurred, and the attribute, and one of the attributes in the database is what that measurement was on the Richter scale. And as we can see here, the values kind of go up and down, they flatten out here, and then there's this big value at 0 here. But what we would expect is that there are very few very large earthquakes that occur every year, and there's a whole bunch of smaller earthquakes. So we would expect these values to kind of keep going up and up as shown by this line here. But what we've done is we've removed the lower values because we're just interested in larger earthquakes in this study. It looks like beginning at around 3.0 here. However, if we do have a bunch of these 0 magnitude earthquakes, and those of course don't actually represent earthquakes that have a 0 magnitude because they wouldn't be an earthquake if they had a 0 magnitude, but they represent instead missing values. So those earthquakes just don't have magnitude values associated with them. So something like this, we definitely want to take a critical look at and think, why do we have 0 magnitude earthquakes even though there's no such thing? Another way that we can do this is by looking at our summary statistics. We can make a chart, and if we expect to see a relationship in a chart, we can hopefully see that relationship, and then we can also see where we're getting data points or where we're getting locations that are away from what we would expect to see. In this example here, what we're seeing is that the average annual temperature is plotted against latitude. So we would expect at lower latitudes there would be a higher average annual temperature, and at higher latitudes there would be a lower average annual temperature. So we do kind of get this clustering into something that looks like a negative correlation here, a downwardly sloping line. So that's a nice way to look at it. One of the other nice things in ArcGIS Pro is that this type of information would be linked to our map. So that, for example, if we selected these points up here, these are locations where the temperature is higher than the expected annual temperature for this latitude. For this latitude here, and then we could see where those points are in the map. And the same with colder areas. Those would be ones well below that line, where the average annual temperature is much lower than would be expected at a particular latitude. So we can kind of explore the data by looking at how our charts are linked to our maps. Another way that we can do things is by summary statistics. So that we have a whole attribute table and we want to summarize something like the sum of all of the different minority groups within the United States, then we can run the summary statistic, and it's going to add up all of those different things for the, in this case sum, or add all the different things for all of these different minority groups. Similarly, we can choose a case field if we have multiple entries for the same place. So in this example here, once again, we're looking at earthquake data, and we're looking at particular earthquakes that occurred. Several of those occurred in Alaska, which has an abbreviation of AK. This shows the number of deaths and how much damage and the magnitude of the earthquake. But we don't know, just by looking at this, how many different records or rows Alaska has in this database. But if we summarize that as a case field, then Alaska will be summarized throughout that attribute table. And now we can see there were 106 different rows that had Alaska. We're only seeing 2 of them here, but there's 104 more of those throughout this attribute table. And even though we had no deaths in these 2 earthquakes here, in some of those other 104 earthquakes, we did have deaths, and the sum of those deaths was 125. So we're not just trying to summarize by the earthquake itself, but by what state it occurred in, and that's why we use the state as the case field in this example here.